We're going to start with chapter 8. And this is another vision, the ram and the goat, and the interpretation of the angel Gabriel. And I'm going to do a little bit of preview, and then I'll get y'all to read it some. With chapter 8, the book of Daniel switches to Hebrew. And that has now been corroborated with other manuscripts from Qumran. And while the shift from Hebrew to Aramaic in the second chapter seems to have been prompted by the speech of the Chaldean interpreters speaking in their own language, there's no reason that's obvious to revert back to Hebrew right here. The vision in chapter 7, if you remember last week, was of cosmic significance. This one is more localized, if that's the right word. And you've got domesticated animals. You've got a ram and a goat. And this vision is more precisely about a historic event that we know about. The interpretation clearly concerns the experience of the Jewish people at a particular traumatic time in their history, specifically when Antiochus Epiphanes went into Jerusalem and desecrated the temple. Specifically, he actually sacrificed a pig at the altar. Ooh, yeah, not cool.
Among many other things, but
yeah, among other things. And the CO says, perhaps the very subject matter, namely the survival of the Jewish people and their faith in the face of such humiliation, inspired the linguistic shift from Aramaic to the rejuvenated national language of the Jewish people. Remember that Aramaic was the language of that part of the world, and the way English is the language of the world today. This vision is dated to the third year of Belshazzar's reign, which is 2 years after the one that we saw in the previous chapter. There are some similar structures, but this one also is very different in that the four powers are not named in chapter 7, but they are named in chapter 8. The ram and the goat are explicitly identified with the Medo-Persian and the Greek empires. So that's your brief introduction. So would somebody like to read verses 1 through 8?
I will.
Go for it, Susan.
Okay. In the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared to me, Daniel, after the one I had that had appeared to me at first. In the vision, I was looking and saw myself in Susa, the capital, in the province of Elam, and I was by the river Ulai. I looked up and saw a ram standing by the river. It had two horns. Both horns were long, but one was longer than the other, and the longer one came up second. I saw the ram charging westward and northward and southward. All beasts were powerless to withstand it, and no one could rescue from its power. It did as it pleased and became strong. As I was watching, a male goat appeared from the west, coming across the face of the whole earth without touching the ground. The goat had a horn between its eyes. It came toward the ram with the two horns that I had been standing. Oh, I'm sorry. It came toward the ram with the two horns that I had seen standing beside the river, and it ran at it with savage force. I saw it approaching the ram. It enraged against it and struck the ram, breaking its two horns. The ram did not have power to withstand it. It threw the ram down to the ground and trampled upon it, and there was no one who could rescue the ram from its power. Then the male goat grew exceedingly great, but at the height of its power, the great horn was broken, and in its place there came up four prominent horns toward the four winds of heaven.
Okay, Kathy, could you read verses 9 through 17, sorry, 9 through 17.
Okay. Out of one of them came another horn, a little one, which grew exceedingly great toward the south, toward the east, and toward the beautiful land. It grew as high as the host of heaven. It threw down to the earth some of the host and some of the stars and trampled on them. Even against the prince of the host, it acted arrogantly. It took the regular burnt offering away from him and overthrew the place of his sanctuary. Because of wickedness, the host was given over to it together with the regular burnt offering. It cast truth to the ground and kept prospering in what it did. Then I heard a holy one speaking, and another holy one said to the one that spoke, "For how long is this vision concerning the regular burnt offering, the transgression that makes it desolate, and the giving over of the sanctuary and host to be trampled?" And he answered, "For 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state." When I, Daniel, had seen the vision, I tried to understand it. Then someone appeared standing before me, having the appearance of a man, and I heard a human voice by the Ulai calling, "Gabriel, help this man understand the vision." So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I became frightened and fell prostrate. But he said to me, "Understand, O mortal, that the vision is for the time of the end."
And could I get somebody to read the last 10 verses? Okay, good.
Bud's getting his glasses
Shit,
on.
glasses.
Okay.
I got more glasses than Imelda Marcos has shoes.
Oh, that's bad.
Okay, where are we here?
Verse 18.
18.
As he was speaking to me, I fell into a trance, face to the ground. Then he touched me and set me on my feet. He said, "Listen, and I will tell you what will take place later in the period of wrath, for it refers to the appointed time of the end. As for the ram that you saw with the two horns, these are the kings of Media and Persia. The male goat is the king of Greece, and the great horn between its eyes is the first king. As for the horn that was broken, in place of which 4 others arose, 4 kingdoms shall arise from his nation, but not with his power. At the end of their rule, when the transgressions have reached their full measure, a king of bold countenance shall arise, skilled in intrigue. He shall grow strong in power, shall cause fearful destruction, and shall succeed in what he does. He shall destroy the powerful and the people of the holy ones. By his cunning he shall make deceit prosper under his hand, and in his own mind he shall be great. Without warning he shall destroy many, and shall even rise up against the Prince of Princes. But he shall be broken, and not by human hands. The vision of the evenings and the mornings that has been told is true. As for you, seal up the vision, for it refers to too many days from now. So I, Daniel, was overcome and lay sick for some days. Then I arose and went about the king's business, but I was dismayed by the vision and did not understand it.
Poor Daniel.
Sounds like today to me.
Nah, this is way back.
Yeah, I'm kind of talking about that toward the end. When he's toward the end of getting his vision, he literally, passes out, falls asleep. It's like his brain is overwhelmed and just shuts down.
And he was very distressed at the end of chapter 7 too.
Yes, and one thing that the commentators makes clear it's kind of ironic that the first half of the book of Daniel, he is interpreting dreams for other people, and now he needs his visions interpreted. So,
And he brought comfort to the kings when he interpreted their visions. And poor thing, he is still distressed.
yeah, it kind of reminded me of the saying that doctors make the worst patients. Being on the other side of the situation doesn't make you any more prepared for it.
If I were Daniel, I think I would check and see what I ate the night before I had these visions,
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point there. So like chapter 7, chapter 8 starts with a date, that this is the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, who will be the last king of Babylon. But the note is made here, one should not think of the glorious imperial city of the Persian rulers, but of the dilapidated provincial fortress of the Babylonians. And somehow the words dilapidated, provincial is not what I think of when I think of Babylonia. In spite of an old tradition that Daniel lived in Susa for some time and was even buried there, there's actually a tomb for Daniel in that city today. The text does not say he was there. I mean, this is a vision, so he saw himself there. Doesn't mean he was actually there.
Right. So some folks somewhere along the way thought, well, put this place in his vision, so let's make a tomb for him here.
Yeah. The initial words here, talking about, this is verses 3 through 8, where they're talking about seeing the ram. It actually is reminiscent of Genesis when Abraham is taking Isaac up the mountain to sacrifice his son. It says Abraham looked up and saw a ram. It's the same language, that Daniel looked up and saw a ram. And so, the Sal, whatever you pronounce his name, makes a whole lot through this chapter in particular, does a whole lot of, this is reminiscent of, over and over and over again. So I'm kind of trying to skip over most of those reminiscence of somebody else. We learn later that the ram,
yeah, there's a lot of symbolism in this.
Yeah. That the ram symbolizes the empire of the Medes and the Persians, and the 2 horns represent the 2 kings. Perhaps Darius the Mede and Cyrus the Persian. The shorter horn that comes in first is the Median kingdom, which came first, while the longer one that comes after is stronger and lasts longer, the Persians. Now the ram is seen charging westward, northward, and southward, but the text does not say east. Some translators add east to make it a more complete, but others say no, he's coming from the east and charging in the other 3 directions.
Yep, he's Persian. Yep.
Yeah. The goat that comes from the west represents Greece. And so that's, one long horn, which is Alexander. And of course, we know he just, as a very young man, took control and just set out to take over the world. I think the only reason he didn't was because he died so young. And then when he died, you know how people are when somebody dies. It's well, I want this and I want this and I want that. So his kingdom was split into 4 pieces, each of which was smaller than the original, obviously, and none of those 4 rulers that followed Alexander had his power. And then another horn appears. And so the little horn is an allusion to our favorite Greek, Antiochus Epiphanes. And Sal says it's unclear why the horn is called little. Perhaps it is to contrast to the great horn of Alexander, because in comparison, Antiochus is just a little local tyrant compared to Alexander. The language here is reminiscent of various ancient Greek myths, ancient Near Eastern myths concerning a rebellion in the heavenly realm. And he goes on and talks about some of those other mythologies. And I have a cat over here trying to get to the hummingbird. It says he grew up great to be the commander of the host. The word for commander in the book of Daniel is always used in reference to divine beings. So this is a martial word, military word. Still, the passage is concerned not with what goes on in heaven only. Rather, the text proceeds immediately to speak of atrocities perpetrated on earth. And one thing that struck me as unusual, or at least a different way to look at things, is that when things go wrong here, it affects heaven. And so, great atrocities affects what goes on in heaven. So that was how they looked at it. And when Antiochus came into the picture, not only did he defile the sanctuary, but he stops the regular festivals. He imposed foreign customs in the city. And one thing I got from reading somewhere else a while back, there were actually Jews who liked the Greek culture in Jerusalem at that time who supported his activities.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't coming in and having everybody opposed to him. He had some support in the Jewish community. Okay, I talked about that. The desecration, as horrible as it was not the result of the powerlessness of God, nor the power of the outside army. And so this is something that, a lot of people wanted to say, well, if God had really been in control, this wouldn't have happened. But Sal makes the point that God is always in control, and sometimes he just stands back and lets stuff happen. And I don't remember if it's this chapter or the next one, but he makes the point that he intercedes with the Jewish people more frequently to keep pulling them back to the right path, where the non-Jewish people, he lets them just keep on keeping on as if he really doesn't care what happens to them. They get their just desserts. He lets them just keep going. Verses 13 and 14 talks about the sevens and it's just lots of supposition about times and dates where they try to figure out, well, if the start time was here, then this happened here, but if that start time was there, it happened. So if y'all want to read that, you can. I'm barreling through this. I already talked about that. In this vision, Daniel is not encountering a human being, but a heavenly reality, a mysterious presence. So when he is approached, he understandably panics and falls prostrate. I'm not sure I like the word panic. I can understand being overwhelmed and falling down on your face, but considering his background, I personally have trouble with the word panic there.
Mm-hmm.
He was terrified from the international.
The NIV.
Mm-hmm.
Tom's reading the NIV over here, and he says that uses the word terrified. Okay, I like terrified better than panic, because to
Mhm.
me, panic implies the loss of any reason. You know, you panic and you go off and you do something. You can be terrified and still not be in panic. This is a standard reaction in the Old Testament of people encountering the presence of God. And he talks about where people have behaved similarly in the other Old Testament books. And they also talk about how when Abraham had a vision, he fell asleep, and then the seer in the book of Revelation collapsed as if he were dead. So that apparently is not unusual. If you run into somebody from heaven, it freaks you out and you pass out. I can understand that. For modern interpreters, the notion of political repression as divine retribution for the victim is troubling. Yet such a view of suffering does have an indisputable place in biblical theology. The doctrine is instructive inasmuch as it blatantly raises the question of human responsibility in the face of tragedy. Actions have consequences. And just because the Jews were God's chosen people didn't mean that they could do something stupid and not suffer from their own stupidity. And so if we blame the situation on an unjust and an uncaring God, or question the very presence of God, that's too convenient and we're missing the point.
I think it's confusing to me in that some of the things in the earlier chapters of Daniel, when we were talking about that, it's that they make it explicit that God is giving this power to Nebuchadnezzar, or it's only through God that Nebuchadnezzar was allowed to do what he was allowed to do, with the Jewish people and with whatever. And so it's almost like if good things happen, it's because of God, but if it's bad things happen, it's because of God too.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's the whole good and bad, the dark and the light are all God. And now it's like if there's anything bad that's happened, what I was taught as I was young, well, that's because of the devil, or that's some evil thing that's causing this bad thing to happen. Well, God let it happen. If God didn't want it to happen, why would it have happened? So it's confusing, to think of free will. I know free will, and then we have free will, but was our free will something ordained by God, whatever choice we made? Or it's confusing when I read Daniel and see, well, yep, there it is. God allowed that to happen. It's like I always think of Judas. God allowed that to happen, or God made it happen.
Well, I think that's one of the main questions humanity has struggled with since the beginning of time. And I can't help but wonder if the Bible just sort of reflects how people have struggled with that over time.
Mhm.
Yeah, but I know it's it's like, so is God letting things happen in Ukraine? Did God let the Holocaust happen? Did questions that can't answer. I don't think we can.
Right. Any answers we come up with are scarier than the questions.
Well, right after I ask God about the dinosaurs, I'll ask him about that.
Okay.
Well, a lot of the catastrophes that happen in the Bible, they explain by saying, well, the people's transgressions got to a certain level and then kabam. So it's not God being mean, it's God reacting to our shortcomings and inadequacies. So that kind of justified the bad stuff happening.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at, free will as, very often in life, I have to pay my stupid tax. I do something stupid. There you go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, I've not heard the term stupid tax, but I like it. It fits.
With an accountant, I can understand that.
Yeah. Okay, going back to what I said about, God correcting the Jewish people more frequently, I want to read this a little bit. In fact, it is a sign of great kindness not to let the impious alone for long, but to punish them immediately. For in the case of the other nations, the Lord waits patiently to punish them until they have reached the full measure of their sins. But he does not deal in this way with us, in order that he may not take vengeance on us afterwards when our sins have reached their height. Therefore, he never withdraws his mercy from us. Although he disciplines us with calamities, he does not forsake his own people. And that's from 2 Maccabees. It's our quotes here.
Another explanation for how it works.
Yeah. Yeah, so hopefully if you find out you're screwing up sooner rather than later, you correct your actions sooner rather than later. And then
Does
Luke
inflation and interest rates come to mind right now?
say that again, Harold.
We've got a tariff. Can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay. Right now it's the same thing. Right now we've got a terrible inflation problem, right? Well, the sooner we bite the bullet and raise rates really high, the inflation will go away. We'll get a recession. But the point is, the longer we wait, the worse it's going to be. And that's sort of along the lines of what you're saying right there, as far as the way history reports God acting. He does it sooner, so it's not as bad than later. But my thoughts are he gave us free will, and we do things, and that causes consequences. He does decide to intervene sometimes, but by and large, it's our free will, and like Jesus said, when the tower fell, stuff happens, and God doesn't always intercede to save everyone. I guess they focus more on the eternal than what's going on here on earth too, maybe. But I think about the Hitler thing, I think that was free will. Neville Chamberlain watched Hitler promise to do what he was going to do and then do it. Well, that was free will. Europe could have stopped Hitler or not. They didn't. Free will. So horrible things happen. So I just don't think we blame God on letting things happen. I think we do things, and sometimes he helps us out, and sometimes he doesn't.
I think a lot of those early scriptures helped people in a confusing time try to make sense of their world and try to give them a sense of control. If we just be good, then God will take care of us and everything will be fine. And if something bad happens, oops, we must have screwed something up. But it gives them a little bit of control over what happens.
Or like you said earlier, a sense of control, even if you don't actually have
Semblance
it.
of control. Yeah, exactly.
We do like to think we're in control.
Right. I know I do.
Really? Never would have guessed.
I know. She said as she spilled her coffee all over her lap.
Oh.
Okay. We're almost finished with this chapter. The transgression of the outsiders against Israel reached their climax with the rise of a king of bold countenance who was skilled in intrigue. So they're not 100% sure that this is Antiochus or not, or if it's just a formula description for any foreign ruler, but it certainly could apply to Antiochus. And then Sal says, God is unquestionably and personally involved in these events. The atrocities committed by Antiochus on earth do not merely have earthly consequences, but they reach the heavens and draw in the supreme ruler of hosts. Thus, the interpretation promises that he, Antiochus, shall be broken and not by hands. This promise echoes Daniel's own interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream of the statue back in chapter 2. And then he makes the point here that theology must have relevance for the present, which is kind of the point of having the Bible at all. And then the conclusion, we've talked about how Daniel really saw no relief, and he's sick for days, and he still continues to be troubled by his vision, even as he continues on with his job. When all is said and done, one cannot be sure about the answer to the question asked in heaven on behalf of humanity. How long? You know, part of me would love to be able to go back in time and talk to these people and say, 2,000 years in the future, we're still struggling with this, just to watch their face go, huh?
You'd be hanged as a witch.
Right, and Tom said, at which point I'd be hanged as a witch. But then since this is science fiction and I'm making up the story, I just go poof and I'm back, and they don't remember the conversation at all.
I don't know. I think if we had a modern day prophet and we heard a prophecy, I think we would panic and be terrified. I know I have that feeling anytime I turn on the news.
Yeah, I see, my sister's got 7 great grandkids, and I think about those kids and the world they're coming into and think, I don't, I have trouble being happy for them. It's like, the world I see is so scary.
Yeah.
So,
But when hasn't it been scary? Just think about it. I mean, some of what we're reading in the Old Testament, of course, it's history. History's written to make a point. It's written in the eye of the writer, so history blames God for this and credits God for that, but it's all about whoever's writing it, what they want to, their view. But as far as I agree, sometimes I really worry about the near future people. But just look back in time. When hasn't it been a terrifying place to live? Depending on where you were at. I mean, just think about the Bay of Pigs. That was a terrifying time period for us. As a country. That was the closest to nuclear war. I mean, and you can just go back all through history, and it's just, when hasn't it been terrifying? And somehow, some way, people make it. Or most of them do, but it's terrifying, yes, but it's always been terrifying.
yeah, good point.
Well, in
I
this,
remember.
go ahead.
Go ahead, Susan.
I was reading, in here, in this chapter 8, it gives the amount of time, and he answered, for 2,300 evenings and mornings, then the sanctuary shall be restored to its rightful state. And I always like to read ahead, like if there's a series of programs that instead of binging, I'll go to the last one to see what happens. Well, if you go to chapter 12, it says, from the time that the regular burnt offering is taken away and the abomination that desolate is set up, there shall be 1,290 days. So 10 days have passed. Okay. Happy are those who persevere and attain the 1,335 days, but you go your way and rest. You shall rise for your reward at the end of the days. So it gives you a positive thing to think about at the very end.
So spoiler alert.
But the positive thing is you're dead.
Yeah, when I'm watching something on television that's based on history, or if it's documentary, I'm on my phone at the same time reading about, how true is this?
Right.
If this is based, you see movies that's, this is based on a true story. So I want to know, how true is it?
Well,
You know,
so
if you've ever read the story of Maria von Trapp, you know, The Sound of Music, she didn't
Very different.
recognize she didn't recognize the story when she saw it. It was so changed.
Mhm. Yeah.
But there's, you know, there's something said about enjoying the journey, you know.
Yeah. But I am always curious, and I am always looking to see how much of this is true and how much of it is.
Mhm.
How do you think these stories that we study, these biblical scriptures, are different from any other culture and any other mythology?
Uh-huh.
Mhm.
And that's something Sal talks about in this book a lot. A lot of the symbolism in these visions is very similar to the Canaanite and Babylonian symbol mythology. I mean, there is some definite differences, but there's also a good amount of similarities.
Well, and often when I read these predictions, I always try to tie it in with something that's happening today.
Uh-huh.
And yet in Daniel, it seems like that these visions and this story is a particular period of time.
Mhm.
That the visions are coming true by history that we know, that was called the end of days in chapter 8, but it was really the end of this period of a particular period of time. Not to say that similar things don't happen every generation. You know, this is just one generation, and what happened to them, or 3 generations and what happened to them, versus, you know, out here today, similar things happen just like they've always happened. But that this is about a particular period of time, and it's not like when I read Revelation, I always think, well, they're talking about something that hasn't happened yet.
Hmm.
You know, but are they talking about something that hasn't happened yet?
Or is it all just symbolic?
Right, right. And it's symbolism, and any story that we read can impact our current life now, because life is life and has the same kind of challenges in it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you think about these, that period of history, and talking about the end of the world or whatever, people in relatively modern times went off in sailing ships and thought the end of the world was on the horizon, and you fall off and that was that. So the perspective of what somebody's world means is really variable.
Mm-hmm. Well, Sarah, you got 2 minutes to do chapter 9.
You're real funny. Okay. Since I do only have 2 minutes left, I'm just going to stop here. And since I'm teaching next week anyway, I'm already prepared.